I never believed in ghosts. Not until I came to Red River, a small town in Tennessee, and heard the whispers myself. That first night in the Bell House felt strange. There was something in the air, an unnatural chill like an invisible hand touching my skin. A thick fog hung over the house, and outside the window the wind whistled through the parched cornfields. The house was large, built of old, weathered wood. The floors creaked with every step as if someone were following me. John Bell, the owner of the house, introduced us to his family, his wife Lucy, his daughter Betsy, and their 2 sons. They seemed friendly, but there was a sadness in their eyes, like people who had not slept well in a long time. That night, while everyone else was asleep, I was awakened by a sound. It wasn't an owl or the wind, it was a whisper. "Go away." I felt something in the corner of the room. Dimly, I could see a shadowy figure standing in the corner, its eyes blank and its face hideous. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then the bedroom door slammed shut. The next day, John Bell stared at me for a long time before saying, "That's him, you heard him?" I didn't ask who he was, I already knew. That night was the second night at the Bell family home, and I began to feel like something was watching me. Since I arrived, the uneasy feeling had been lingering in my chest, as if there were invisible eyes watching me from the corners of the house. The old wooden walls of this house seemed to hold whispers that could not be heard by ordinary ears. During dinner, I noticed Betsy, the Bell family's teenage daughter, sitting with a pale face. Her hands trembled as she spooned soup into her mouth. John Bell also looked restless, occasionally looking out the window as if watching something outside. "The backfield," he muttered softly. I frowned. "What do you mean?" John Bell didn't answer, but Lucy, his wife, looked up with a blank stare. "Every night he comes to the backfield, walking back and forth, looking for something." My heart beat faster. "Who?" Lucy just shook her head. "No one knows, but if you hear a knock on your bedroom wall tonight, don't answer it." Midnight. I woke up in a cold sweat. Something had woken me up. It was soft, almost like a twig being tapped against the wall. But the rhythm was strange, like someone, or something, was trying to get my attention. I held my breath, remembering Lucy's warning. "Don't answer her, don't make a sound." This time louder. I felt my chest tighten with fear. Slowly, I sat up in bed, my eyes glued to the bedroom window. Outside, the backfield was covered in thick fog. But there was something there. The figure of a woman stood in the fog. Her dress was in tatters, her hair was long and messy, and her face blank, empty, like a dead mask. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight. Then something crept into my ear. "I see you." The coldness froze my blood. The bedroom door slammed shut on its own. And for the first time in my life, I realized that I was not alone in this room. I didn't sleep that night. After the bedroom door slammed shut, I could only sit on the bed, my body stiff with fear. The knocking had stopped, but the silence that remained was even more terrifying. I felt something in this room, something lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to let my guard down. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the whisper again. "I saw you." Morning came slowly, as if time itself was reluctant to move in this house. When the sun finally penetrated the window, I hurried down to the kitchen, hoping to find peace among the other residents of the house, but they all looked pale and tired. Lucy Bell served bread and soup, but no one really ate. Betsy, who was sitting at the head of the table, kept staring at her plate with a blank expression. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Betsy lifted her face slowly. Her black eyes were glassy. "He won't let us sleep," she said softly. "He's always here." John Bell sighed, setting his spoon down roughly on the table. "We must not talk about him," he said firmly. "The more you talk, the stronger he becomes." I wanted to ask more, but Lucy put her hand on mine, gripping it tightly. Her fingers were cold as ice. "You have to go before it's too late," she whispered. Before I could answer, something happened. Betsy was suddenly thrown from her chair, her body hitting the wooden floor hard. She screamed, clawing at her own neck as if an invisible hand was strangling her. John and Lucy immediately ran to her, trying to hold her shaking body. I could only stare in horror. On the back of Betsy's neck, black fingerprints appeared as if an invisible hand had really strangled her just now. Suddenly, the air in the room became heavy. A shrill sound filled the room, a laugh that was not human. Then something whispered in my ear, "Sleep well, sweet child." I ran out of the house trying to get some fresh air, but I knew one thing for sure. No one will sleep soundly in this house anymore. After the incident in the kitchen, the atmosphere in the house grew tense. No one spoke of what had happened to Betsy, but I could see the fear in their eyes. John Bell began carrying a shotgun around with him, though I knew it would be useless against something invisible. Lucy grew thinner, as if something were sucking the life out of her little by little. And Betsy, she didn't speak again. That night I sat in the living room, trying to calm my thoughts. The fire in the fireplace blazed low, providing a small amount of light in the gloomy room. Then, suddenly, the voice came again. "John Bell." I froze. It wasn't a human voice, it was a strange voice, like many voices speaking at once, like a whisper from another world. I turned slowly. Betsy was standing in front of the fireplace. Her eyes were blank, her lips slightly parted, but it wasn't her voice that came out of her mouth. "John Bell, your time is almost up." I jumped to my feet, but before I could move, Betsy screamed. Her voice was shrill, not like a normal human voice. The window suddenly opened by itself. A strong wind hit the room. The candles went out, and suddenly the house was plunged into darkness. I felt something standing behind me. A chill ran down the back of my neck, my breath froze in the air. I didn't dare turn around. Then something whispered in my ear, "Don't say my name." I closed my eyes, hoping this was all just a bad dream. But when I opened them, I saw Betsy staring at me with a horrified expression. "What do you see?" I whispered. Her hand trembled, pointing behind me. I turned my head slowly and saw her. In the shadow of the almost extinguished fireplace, a woman stood. Her face was terrifying, her black eyes empty like bottomless pits. Her lips grinned, showing rows of teeth that were too sharp to be human. Then she whispered one sentence that made my blood run cold. "I will kill John Bell." The fire in the fireplace went out, leaving the house in complete darkness. And I know, we are all in danger. I couldn't sleep again after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her. That woman with her empty black eyes and that creepy smile that didn't belong on a human face. Something was beginning to dawn on me. This wasn't just a ghostly disturbance, there was something bigger, more ancient, and more dangerous in this house. And it wanted John Bell dead. I tried to talk to John about it, but he just shook his head. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "She's been following me for a long time." I paused. "What do you mean?" I asked finally. John sighed, then stood up from his chair. He walked to the corner of the room, lifted the old carpet, and revealed a loose floorboard. With shaking hands, he pried the board open and pulled out something. A very old-looking wooden box. "This is from the 1600s, he said, handing it to me. I opened the box, and inside I found something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. An old scroll written with something in faded ink. I read it, and the more I read, the more I felt sick. "This curse is passed down to your blood. If its name is spoken, it will come. If you defy it, it will punish you. And if you try to escape, it will follow you forever." I looked at John, my heart pounding. "Did you speak its name?" I asked. John didn't answer. He just stared at the long, unlit fireplace, his expression blank and full of fear. I felt something move behind me. The shadows on the walls began to change shape. Then the voice came again, a deep, sinister whisper coming from every direction. "It's too late." The candle on the table went out on its own, leaving us in darkness. And that's when I heard the ground shifting outside the window. Someone or something was digging in the backyard. I grabbed the lantern and ran out of the house. The cold wind hit my face, but I didn't care. I followed the sound, and what I found almost made me scream. A grave, and someone or something that dug all the way into it. I stared into the deep grave, and there in the darkness I saw it. A pair of pale white hands reached out of the ground. And then a face appeared. His eyes were blank. His lips moved, saying something I couldn't hear, but I knew what he was saying. He was saying my name. I stood at the edge of the grave, my body frozen. My breath stopped. From inside the pitch-black hole in the ground, the face became clearer. His skin was pale like a long-buried corpse. His eyes were empty. His lips moved as if he were muttering something. Then I heard it, a voice that was more like a sob mixed with a whisper. "John Bell, your time is up." I staggered back, but the ground beneath my feet felt soft, as if it wanted to swallow me too. I tried to steady myself, but suddenly there was a hand gripping my ankle. I screamed. Thin, cold fingers grabbed me from the ground, pulling me into the grave. I tried to pull away, but the grip was strong, as if death itself did not want to let me go. Then something pulled me back. John Bell had grabbed my shoulder and pulled me out of the grave. My breath was ragged, my heart beating so fast that I felt like I was going to pass out. But when I saw John's face, I knew our troubles were not over. Her eyes widened in fear, and she pointed behind me. I turned slowly and saw her. The figure had emerged from its grave. It stood in the dugout dirt, its body gaunt and its black dress billowing in the night breeze. Its hair was long and messy, covering most of its hideous face. It stared directly at John. "You cannot escape your destiny, John Bell." Her voice was layered, many voices speaking at once, as if more than one soul were inhabiting her body. John fell to his knees. "Please." Her voice was shaky. I didn't know this would happen. But the figure only smiled, a smile too wide for a human face. And then it began to walk toward the house. I ran after it, but as soon as I was about to touch it, its body dissolved into a black mist that drifted into the house. Then Betsy's scream echoed through the house. I rushed inside, my heart pounding. Inside the house, Betsy floated in the air, her body stiff like a puppet controlled by something unseen. Her mouth was open, and from within her a woman's voice came. "The time has come." The candles in the house were extinguished, a cold wind blew through the room, and I knew tonight something terrible was going to happen. I couldn't move. Before me, Betsy was still floating in the air, her body stiff like a porcelain doll that had lost its soul. From her lips, the woman's voice continued to speak. "The time has come." John Bell knelt on the floor, his face wet with sweat. His eyes stared at his daughter's figure with deep fear. "Please," he whispered, barely audible. The figure laughed. Betsy fell to the ground as if the threads holding her had been cut. I rushed to her, checking her pulse. She was still alive, but her body was shaking violently. And when I looked at John again, I saw something that made me freeze. A black shadow appeared behind her. The shadow had no eyes, no face, just a dark shape that slowly crept up John's body. John began to cough, then choke. He clutched his throat as if something were choking him from the inside. I wanted to help him, but my legs felt heavy as if something were holding me in place. Then from within the shadow, I saw something. A long, thin hand with sharp nails appeared and grabbed John's head. John fell to the floor. His eyes were wide, his face blue. He tried to speak, but all that came out was a terrible gurgling sound. And then his body went still. John Bell was dead. The house fell silent. The woman stood in the corner of the room, smiling broadly. The curse has been fulfilled. And then her body began to fade. But before she completely disappeared, she whispered one more thing. "I will return." Then a cold wind blew through the house. The extinguished candles reignited, but the atmosphere in the house was different. Something had changed. And I knew the curse was not over.